It started as a whisper among the villagers one hot summer afternoon, barely more than a murmur in the air. "Snakes on the loose," someone said, their voice filled with unease. The phrase spread quickly, as rumors often do, but this one wasn't like the others. It had weight, something unexplainable. There were snakes everywhere, the villagers said. Big ones, little ones, snakes that had slithered into gardens, under porches, and even into the kitchens of homes. And with each retelling, the snakes seemed to grow bigger, more aggressive. The stories became impossible to ignore. At first, Emma didn't believe it. Her family lived on the edge of the village, near the old woods, and they had always been surrounded by nature. A snake here or there was common, nothing to get worked up about. But when she went out to gather eggs from the chicken coop one morning, her foot brushed against something cold and slimy. She froze, and before she could react, a large black snake shot out from under the coop, hissing and striking at the air. Emma jumped back, heart pounding, and watched as it disappeared into the brush. She had never seen a snake that large before, and her blood ran cold. There was something unnatural about it, something that made her wonder if the stories were true. When she returned to the house, shaking, she told her father what had happened. Her father, a sturdy man of few words, had always been the one to calm her fears, but this time his face hardened when she spoke. "We've been hearing about these snakes too," he said. "And it's not just the village. They're spreading, coming out of the woods. We've got to be careful." The next day, Emma's father, Thomas, went out to inspect the property, his axe slung over his shoulder. He moved slowly, scanning the ground, his eyes narrowed. He had been a woodsman all his life, and nothing escaped his watchful eye. For hours he walked the perimeter of the family's land, looking for signs of any nests or disturbances, but he found nothing unusual. Emma felt a flicker of relief, but that night, after they had sat down to dinner, the ground trembled slightly. The sound came first, a faint hissing, almost like a whisper on the wind. But then, from the darkened corner of the yard, a low rustling broke the stillness. Emma's heart leaped into her throat. Her father stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Stay inside," he ordered, grabbing the rifle from above the fireplace. Emma's mother, Eliza, stood frozen by the door, her face pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her children. Through the window, Emma saw her father step cautiously toward the barn. There, in the dimming light, she saw it. A writhing mass, a slithering coil of snakes, their bodies long and sleek, twisting and hissing as they moved in synchronized motion. Her father raised his rifle, but his hand hesitated. The snakes were too many, too close. A single shot wouldn't do it. He motioned for Emma's mother to bring the children into the back room. "Go now," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'll handle this." As her mother herded the children away, Emma couldn't take her eyes off her father. She watched him stand his ground, his face set in grim determination. Then, in a blur of motion, he swung the axe down with force, striking at the closest snake, severing its head with a sickening crunch. The other snakes hissed louder, a frightening sound, and they began to coil around his feet. Her father hacked at them furiously, his movements swift, but there were too many. By the time Emma and her mother got back to the window, the yard was covered in snakes, writhing and wriggling, blocking the path to the barn and the house. The barn door had been shattered from the inside, and the smell of blood was thick in the air. Emma's heart dropped. Her father was fighting a losing battle, his body nearly hidden by the writhing creatures. Her mother screamed, and Emma grabbed her arm. "We need to get out, now!" But it was too late. The snakes had already started to enter the house, slithering through cracks in the walls, under the door, curling up near the corners. Emma could hear the hissing, louder now, filling every space, growing closer and closer. The family ran, gathering up what little they could, and bolted out the back door. The air was thick with the sound of hissing, and Emma's skin prickled as she felt the snake's cold presence just behind them. As they sprinted toward the village, they could see that they weren't alone. The villagers were emerging from their homes too, armed with pitchforks, axes, and whatever tools they could find. The panic was palpable. People shouting, running, trying to escape the serpents that seemed to have taken over the land. They gathered in the square, their eyes wide with fear as they counted the number of snakes in the street. There were too many. Word spread quickly, and a group of men formed to track the source of the infestation. The leader, a man named Samuel, called for calm. "We need to find where they're coming from. There must be a nest, some place where they're breeding," he said, his voice loud and commanding. But his face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he held a lantern high. The villagers searched the town, combing through barns and sheds, ransacking any building where snakes might hide. They found them in the haylofts, in the crawlspaces, even in the wells. But no matter how many they killed, there were always more. The snakes came from all directions, as if the very ground was alive with them. By evening, the village was overrun. Samuel and his group had found a large cavern just outside the village, deep in the forest. It seemed to be the source of the infestation, a massive underground lair where thousands of snakes had gathered. They had been breeding in secret, hidden beneath the earth. The air was thick with their hiss as the men descended into the cavern, determined to end the nightmare. The moment they entered, the snakes surged toward them, striking with terrifying speed. It was a battle, a fight for survival. Samuel swung his sword wildly, cutting through the serpents, but they were relentless. The men moved back, slowly retreating as more snakes poured in from the tunnels. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, and the air was thick with venom. "We need to burn them out," Samuel yelled, and the men lit torches, tossing them into the cavern. The flames spread quickly, catching on the dry leaves and roots that lined the cave. For a moment it seemed as though the snakes were going to win. But the fire soon overtook them, and the hissing grew louder as the serpents were driven out by the heat. The battle raged on for hours. By dawn, the villagers had finally won. The cavern was burning, and the snakes that had once overrun the town were now nothing but ashes. The village was safe, but at what cost? As the villagers gathered in the town square, exhausted and covered in dirt and blood, they realized the magnitude of what had just happened. They had lost homes, livestock, and friends to the attack. Emma and her family had been spared, but many others were not as fortunate.